Hello, Rabbi. Hello, everybody.
Hello, welcome back to the daily Rambam Shir. Today we are up to chapter 7 of the laws of the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. It is Thursday, so let us get started with an overview of where we are up to in the Rambam. We are learning the Rambam's work, Mishnah Torah, like the Mishnah as in second to the Torah. The Rambam said that in his introduction, if a person just reads the 5 books of the Chumash and then reads the Rambam, then he will have an understanding of it all, the written law and the oral law. He actually faced criticism for saying so, but certainly us in our daily study of the Rambam are familiarizing ourselves with every topic that exists in Jewish law. Mishnah Torah has 14 volumes. We are now up to book number 8. We're more than halfway through the entire Rambam, a tremendous achievement. We are in book number 8, which is called Sefer Avodah, the book of service, or of temple service. This book has 9 subjects. It has 95 chapters, so it will take overall about 3 months. We're already a couple of weeks in. Let's take a look. Let's open up the 8th volume. So here we are. These are the 8 subjects. The first 8 chapters, or the first topic, is Beis HaBechira. It was all about the Beis HaMikdash. We covered that. The next topic is Klei HaMikdash, utensils of the temple. That's where we are now, and there are 10 chapters in that. Third topic is Bias HaMikdash, entering the Beis HaMikdash. The fourth is Surei Mizbeach, forbidden offerings, and then bringing offerings, the daily and added offerings, things disqualified in the Beis Hamikdash, the surface of Yom Kippur, and finally sacrilege. So it's a lot of subjects. As we said, a total of 95 chapters. But for the last week, today is day 7. Today we are up to chapter 7 of the, I see there's a mistake here. It says 7. This is supposed to be 8. We're up to the 8th volume, not the 7th volume, if I remember correctly. So within Bias HaMikdash, within Klei HaMikdash, utensils of the temple, today we are learning chapter 7. So this topic, just if it was subdivided, I saw it subdivided somewhere, the first 2 chapters spoke about the oil, the utensils, and the ketores, the incense. The next 5 chapters spoke about people that serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and that's what we're concluding today. And then the next 2 chapters, what we'll learn about on Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday will be about the garments of the Kohanim. So that's giving you your your bird's eye view of where we're up to in the Rambam. We're in volume 8, which is the book of service, and within that volume, we're in the laws of Klei HaMikdash, the utensils of the temple. And today we will be learning about people that served in the temple. This is an overview of today's chapter. Chapter 7, let's put that on the side as we go through the list, looking at the text of the Rambam inside. Were you able to see the PowerPoint as I went through it? Until now, yes, you were. Okay, good. I was worried that I hadn't shared it. I did share it. So here we go. Here are the laws of, here are the laws of the chapter 7 of the laws of Klei HaMikdash, the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rambam says that there were 15 officers in the Beis HaMikdash, and each officer would also be appointed over these 15 matters in future times. This is how many officers there were in the past. These are like managing directors. Each directors of different departments. If you want to know how to run a business, everything is in Torah. Here we have a big operation. It's the operations of the Beis Hamikdash. And we have 15 managing directors that were appointed and will be appointed in the future. Who are they? So he first gives the list and then he goes through each one. First was in charge of scheduling, or the time. The second was in charge of the locking of the gates. The third director was in charge of the guards. The fourth was in charge of the singers, people that sang. The fifth was in charge of the musical instruments. The sixth was in charge of the lotteries. The seventh was in charge of the doves, the pairs of doves. This is a big industry in the Beis Hamikdash. It doesn't. The soap company wasn't the first to come up with it. Already the Beis Hamikdash, dove was a big word. Many doves. Then we have the seals. We're not talking about in the ocean. We're talking about the other type of seal. And then a director of wine libations, a director of the sick. Yeah, believe it or not, people got sick in the Beis Hamikdash. The director of water, the director of making the showbread. Those were brought every week for the week from Shabbos to Shabbos. The director of making the incense, the ketores, the director of making the curtains. So if you're a kohen and you're into curtains, then you have a future. And finally, those that made the priestly garments. If you're a seamstress and you're a kohen, then you may be hired. If Mashiach comes today, we're going to make sure we'll need to quickly hire these 15 directors to each take charge of the different areas of the Beis Hamikdash. Each of these officers had many men under his command in order to arrange the task over which he is appointed. The one appointed to supervise the times. So nowadays we have alarm clocks and calendars, all in digital form, at least most of us today. But we shouldn't take it for granted. Back at the Beis Hamikdash, the director of times had to ensure that everybody was on time, each to their tasks. So when the time comes for an offering to be brought, he would need to be on the case, on time. Here, one of the men under his charge announced, "Priests, arise to the temple service. Levites, go to the platform. Israelites, to the Ma'amad, where they would watch." When his voice was heard, everybody would proceed to his task. That was scheduling. The one appointed to supervise the locking of the gates. The Beis Hamikdash did not run around the clock. It had its hours from sunrise to sunset. And whoever was in charge of locking the gates would command, lock the gates, open the gates. And those who sounded the trumpets every day for the opening of the gates would only sound the trumpets when they got the green light from the officer of gates, locking of the gates. Every day the trumpets would sound 3 times as the gates were opened. A tekiah, a teruah, a tekiah, boo, and then we knew that it was time. No, that wasn't a train. It was the shofar blowing in the Beis Hamikdash to announce the opening of the gates. The guards. So this we learned all about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. The Rambam told us about all the different guards and their positions. So the one appointed to supervise the guards, he was referred to back then as Ish Harabayas, if you remember, Mr. Temple Mount, who would walk around checking the Leviim, who would guard the temple every night. We said the Leviim were on the outside, the Kohanim on the inside. And as we mentioned, there's no sleeping on the job, because if you do, then he would strike them with his staff and burn the person's garments. This is a very this is. I mean, if you think that what do you call it? Buckingham Palace has got it tough. These guys, they had the whole world in their hands. The temple is the epicenter of planet Earth, and all the planets for that matter. Number 5, the one appointed to supervise the singers, a choir master. I don't know if he was the choir master, but he was in charge. Each day he would choose singers to stand on the duchen to sing melodies. At his command, also the trumpets would be sounded for the sacrifices. So whenever an offering was brought, it was a whole procession. They wouldn't just put the animal on the altar. They would sound the trumpets and they would sing and they would play music. So this, he who was in charge of the singers would get the Leviim up on stage, and he would announce or give the green light for those sounding the trumpets. How many times do they sound the trumpets? No less than 21 times a day. 3 as they open the gates, we already mentioned that. Then they would sound the trumpets 9 times before the morning offering, the Tamid Shel Shachar, and the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, and the afternoon offering. So these 2 daily offerings were brought on behalf of the entire Jewish people. And before these 2 daily offerings were brought, corresponding to which we daven every morning and afternoon, corresponding to those 2 offerings, the trumpets would be blasted 9 times in the morning and 9 times in the afternoon. We'll learn about that later. If there was a Musaf, so that would be like Shabbos or Yom Tov, so that's an added offering, like we have an added Shemona Esrei today, the added what we say Musaf on Shabbos or Rosh Hashanah, so then an additional 9 trumpets would be blasted. Now, if Rosh Chodesh or a festival fall on Yom Tov, so nowadays we daven Musaf once, but in the Musaf davening for Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos Yom Tov, we mentioned both sets of offerings. At the times of the Beis Hamikdash, there would be 2 offerings. One Musaf offering, one added offering that was brought for Shabbos, and the second Musaf offering that was brought for Rosh Chodesh or for Yom Tov. So they wouldn't need to repeat the sounding of the trumpets for each of these Musafim. Rather, they would sound the trumpets those 9 times once, no matter how many Musaf offerings were being brought. 1, 2, or if Rosh Hashanah fall on Shabbos, even 3 offerings were brought, they would only sound it once. Why 3 times if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos? Because it's Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh, it's the beginning of the month, not just the beginning of the year. And if it falls on Shabbos, they would bring 3 offerings, but sound the trumpets only once. Or 9 times, but only one series of 9. So when else would they sound the trumpets? On a Friday, they would sound the trumpets 6 times. 3 times to let people to advise people to stop working. That would be by around Plag HaMincha, about an hour and a quarter before Shabbos. It's time to close up shop, time to go home. I remember when I was learning in Israel, I don't know if I've shared this on this platform, but we were going to somebody for the meal, for the Friday night meal. And I decided that on the way there, I'll pick up a present from the shuk. It was a few minutes before Shabbos. I took exact change. I knew roughly how much it costs. And I thought I'll pick up the gift, and from there I'll go straight to shul. When I got to the store, so the whole shuk was closed except for one guy. And he wasn't supposed to be open because it was minutes before Shabbos. But it worked for me because I was able to buy whatever, the cake or whatever it was I wanted to buy. But there was another Hasidic Jew over there, and he shouted at me. He said, "Why are you making a purchase? You're supporting him violating the law of still having his store open so close to Shabbos." I said, "You're 100% right." I felt so terrible. So, yeah. So 3 trumpets would be sounded an hour and a quarter before Shabbos to tell people to start closing up shop. Excuse the pun. And then another 3 trumpets would be sounded at the commencement of Shabbos to distinguish between the holy and the mundane. Nowadays as well, in more religious communities, I haven't heard it yet in Glen Hazel, but maybe we'll get there, maybe in Oakland, but they have in Crown Heights and in Jerusalem, most Israeli cities, they actually have a siren that goes off right before, by candle lighting. You hear it in the whole neighborhood, and that tells people that it's time to light Shabbos candles. Nowadays, it's not a siren. They've upgraded to beautiful Shalom Aleichem music. So this originates already in temple times. The person that was in charge of the singers, I don't know if he was in charge of all of this. I think once we mentioned the trumpets, which he would get into place before the offerings were brought, we mentioned all the other times that the trumpets were sounded. 2 sets being leading up to Shabbos, in advance of Shabbos and at the onset of Shabbos. So when else would they blow the trumpets? On Yom Tovim, 3 are added to announce the opening of the lower gate, the gate to the women's courtyard. It's called the women's courtyard, but it actually wasn't only the women's courtyard. It was a much larger courtyard, which also included an Ezras Nashim, a section for women. We'll learn more about that, or we learned more about that a little while back. So as those gates were opened, when there were high volumes of people, when the tens of thousands, maybe even millions of people came 3 times a year for the pilgrimages, as those gates were opened, or before they were opened, they would sound the shofar 3 times, and another 3 times to announce the opening of the upper gate. Why is it called the upper gate? Because it was higher than the women's courtyard. On Sukkot, 3 trumpet blasts are added to announce the filling of a vessel with water, which is used for a libation on that holiday. Generally, they would actually pour wine over the sides of the altar. It was a special proceeding or offering where they'd pour the wine on the altar. But Sukkot, there was a special added pouring of water. Hasidus explains that taste represents understanding, but water, which doesn't have taste, represents a joy that's beyond understanding. And that's why Sukkot is called the festival of joy. It was the time when they poured the water, which represents a level of joy that is even beyond comprehension. So before they would pour that water on Yom Tov, they would sound the trumpets. They would not sound the trumpets for the filling of the water on Shabbos. 3 trumpet blasts are added upon the altar when the water libation is being offered. Okay. So sorry, they sounded the trumpets when they filled the vessels with water. And then again, when the water was poured out of those vessels onto the altar. I mean, even today, in a different context, for making matzah. So in order to ensure that the matzah doesn't become chametz, so the water should already be drawn the day before to sit out overnight to cool off. This is the process of making hand-baked matzah. They actually take the water out the day before, and then it sits so that by the next morning it's nice and cool, and then they use it to bake matzah. So that process of drawing the water the day before, even today, is like a process in its own right, where people come around and watch it, the kind of reminding us of temple times, where part of the procession was not just pouring the water on the altar, but already filling the vessels with water. Okay, we've got a very active participant, Baruch Hashem. All of these trumpet blasts were sounded under the director of the officer in charge of the singers. So we didn't just go on a tangent. Every time that the trumpets were sounded, it was directed by the grand managing director of singers, who would give the green light to blow the trumpets. All of these blasts were sounded with trumpets. Moving along, we are up to the instruments. The one appointed to supervise the cymbal, he would arrange all the musicians who would help the Levites together with the instruments, as was explained previously. It looks like we have a singer on board. The only problem is that he's neither a Kohen nor a Levi. So we'll have to see what role he could play when Mashiach comes. I'm sure there will be plenty of other roles. Number 8, halacha 8, lotteries. I put in the reminder of the class. You want to know who's behind all the lotteries? Well, sorry, I don't know if you call this bad news or good news. I'm talking about the big lotteries, the ones that go out in the Beis Hamikdash. Soon Mashiach will come, and there was a whole series of lotteries that took place in the Beis Hamikdash. There's a whole chapter that was dedicated to the lotteries. So there was an officer that was in charge of the lotteries. So he would oversee all the lotteries that were conducted between the Kohanim every day, for each Kohen to perform the task that he acquired through the lotteries. So we're talking about big lotteries over here, not billions, but more than money. It's affording each Kohen to the job that he would win in the daily lotteries that took place at the Beis Hamikdash. There were 4 lotteries conducted every day. In Hilchos Tamidim, I will explain, says the Rambam, how these lotteries were conducted. We had thumbs involved. We'll get there. Moving along to the pairs of doves. Okay, so we're talking now about the dove industry. The one appointed to supervise the sale of the pairs of doves. So a lot of offerings that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash included doves. So whether it was somebody who had sara'as, for speaking Lashon Hara, leprosy, or whether it was for a nazir, many times a person would bring a pair of doves as an offering. Now, where would he get the doves from? So the temple treasury would purchase these doves, and then they would sell it to the director of the doves. He is the one with whom a price is determined. He would set the price to sell pairs of doves for the sacrifices. so and so many doves for a seller. So prices went up and down, right? According to supply, according to demand. There were times when a lot of offerings were being brought and they needed a lot of doves, and times where less were offered. So on a monthly basis, he doesn't say here on a monthly basis, but it was on a monthly basis. I'll get Bobby coming home, okay? On a monthly basis, the price would be set by the officer of the doves of what the going rate would be, how many doves you could buy for a seller. Now, everyone who was obligated to bring turtle doves or doves as a sacrifice would bring money for them to the temple. The officer would give the pairs of doves to the people bringing the sacrifices. He would make a reckoning with the treasurers and would provide him with they would provide him with the doves. So as I said, the temple treasury bought the doves, and then the officer of the doves would set the price, and he would supply these doves from the temple treasury to the purchasers of them. Every 30 days, a price was established with him. If the price decreases during that month, then the temple treasurers supply him with them according to the lower price. So we've learned on numerous occasions that we're talking about the temple treasury. The temple treasury always has the upper hand. And so therefore, if the price goes down, then the temple treasury can be, let me get this right, can pay him less. If it increases, then they keep the same price, meaning they don't need to pay more. But the temple is always given the upper hand. Similarly, if a pair of doves is discovered to be unacceptable or was disqualified before it was offered, the officer must provide another in its place. I didn't get down to the exact dynamics of how this works. Apologies, perhaps for some additional research, but I see we've got another 11 halachas and 3 minutes. Let's see what we can do. The one appointed to supervise the sale of the seals. So this is another currency. We've spoken about the dove dealings, but there's a whole currency of seals. How did that work? So if somebody wanted to bring an offering, every offering was accompanied by libations, by flour, by water, by wine. So people would purchase a seal and then they would trade the seals in. So this person was appointed to supervise the seals. He would receive the money for the wine libations from those obligated to bring them and give them a seal. So they would pay for a seal, kind of like paying for a token. The one appointed to supervise the wine libations would sell the wine libations. So when it was, so that's moving on to the next one. The one appointed for wine libations, number 9 in our list of 15. What is implied? There were 4 seals of the temple. One which had calf written on it, meaning the libations that accompanied a calf. One that had male, libations that accompanied a male. Third said kid, means if it was a child, or goat, maybe calf. Then kid over here means as in a goat. Then the amount of wine and flour and oil that would need to be brought with it. And the 4th said sinner, again another offering. Each had their own measures of side offerings, the sachim, libations, and the person bringing an offering would purchase his seal. And then whoever would bring his sacrifices to the temple would give the money for the wine libations to the officer in charge of the seals. He would give him seals according to the number of sacrifices he brought. If a person was afflicted with tsaras, was wealthy, then he would give him 1 seal with sinner written upon it, which means the libations for a full cow. If he was poor, then he would be able to bring doves, which wouldn't require a libation, if I remember correctly. The recipient, or maybe a much smaller one, the recipient then takes the seals to the officer in charge of the wine libations, and he gives him wine libations according to the number of seals he has, and one is written upon it. Now, in the evening, the 2 officers meet, and one gives the other seals, and the other takes the money in exchange. So, kind of like if you had a desk at a fair that was selling tickets, at the end of the evening, the guy has all of the money, and the other guys, each of the rides have their tickets, and they would each trade to get paid according to the tickets that they have. Now, if there's extra money, then it would go to the temple treasury, because we said the temple treasury has the upper hand. If there's less money, then whatever officer it was in charge of the seals would have to pay out of his pockets, right? Bad news if a banker is counting up how much money is in his till, or a turnip for that matter, and it doesn't match up, then they need to pay out of pocket, because part of their responsibility is to ensure that nobody gets lost. When a person loses a seal, so this is an interesting one. So if I bought a seal, not to go on a roller coaster, but I bought a seal to accompany my offering, and I lost it, I dropped it, but I paid for it already. So what I would do is I would wait around till the end of the day, and then we would see if the treasury has extra funds, then that's proof that I paid, because they traded in all the seals, so there's more money than seals. So I could say it's confirmed that I obviously lost my seal, and then they would let me go ahead and get my libations. Obviously, if there wasn't extra money, then it means that the seal that I lost was lost, and I would have to pay for another one. Now, they would put a date on each of the seals. They didn't want internal markets going on. You know, when demand was high and the prices were higher, or when demand was low and prices were down, a guy would buy a whole lot of seals, and then he could show up to the Temple Mounds 2 months later, middle Erev Pesach, when everybody needs their stuff, and he could start selling these seals and making a fortune. No, we don't want any in between the transactions going on, and so all the seals were dated, so they would expire at the end of the day. Okay, now every 30 days, the price of the wine and the flour is established with the officer in charge of the wine libations. Again, if it increases, he needs to supply them according to the price established beforehand. If it decreases, then he goes by the lower price, because we said the temple treasury always has the upper hand. Profit of the temple treasury makes of these fluctuations in price is called the windfall of the libations. It is used to purchase burnt offerings as the dessert of the altar. Burnt offerings or doves are not used for that purpose, because doves are not used. So basically, sometimes when there were extra funds, they would use these funds to buy additional offerings that would be like desserts, extra treats for the temple at a time when there was less offerings being brought. Sorry, we've gone a little over time. Try to run through it as quickly as I could. But at the time where it was quieter, then they would offer additional dessert, extra treats on the altar, which were purchased from extra money that they had. Now, moving on to the sick. Since, I'm sorry if we have any Kohanim with us, this might be a tough one, but I guess big positions come with their challenges. Since the priests stand on the floor all day, they eat a lot of meat, right, all the offerings, and they're not covered by any garments other than one cloak. They had a pair of pants, a cloak, a belt, and a hat, and that's it. They kind of ran around in shorts. So it was cold, and they're eating a lot of meat. They're working hard, and so they often suffered issues with their digestion. They often got sick. Therefore, an officer is appointed to check them and heal all their illnesses. He and the people in his charge are involved with them at all times. So there was actually a infirmary. There was a doctor's office within the Beis Hamikdash with the managing director, Kohen doctor, with other doctors in his practice to ensure that all the Kohanim were treated appropriately. Similarly, an officer is appointed to dig cisterns and reservoirs, and fix the cisterns for people at large. Remember, we had maybe even millions of people coming to Jerusalem. They needed good water supply, and I don't know, hopefully they did a better job than, okay, we're not going to bad about anybody, but talking about water shortages and water outages. So the Beis Hamikdash, they needed to make sure they had ample supply, and so they had a managing director to ensure that there was water. Elsewhere, it says that these were actually professionals. They were brilliant. They were able to look at any piece of earth and know exactly where water would be found and where to dig. I guess it's like a borehole professional today. So if you have expertise in boreholes and you're a Kohen, then a job awaits you when Mashiach comes. And then there was one appointed for all the craftsmen who prepare the showbread. So that's the bread. He supervises all their work. One appointed for the craftsman who prepares the incense offering. Again, a real profession to be able to get just the right spices in the right proportions. Somebody in charge of that. Interestingly, the Gemara says that the guys in charge of these things that were experts didn't want to share the recipe. They didn't want to share how it's done. They got a lot of criticism until eventually it was discovered they were worried that idolaters would find out how incenses were brought and use it for idolatry. So it was actually a good thing that they kept a secret of the art of their professions. Okay, then the curtains. If you make curtains or somebody in charge of that, each year they would need to make two curtains for the Holy of Holies. Why? Because the incense would actually burn the curtains or the outer, so they would need to constantly replace the curtains on an annual basis. There were 6 folds, the strands, and 4 types of fabric: linen, sky blue dyed wool, purple dyed wool, and crimson dyed wool. Each one was 6-fold, thus there were 24 strings being woven through these curtains. The curtains were a handbreadth thick. They must have been really heavy to have a curtain that's a handbreadth wide, thick. And then they were woven with 72 heddles. Its length was 40 cubits. Okay, the Beis Hamikdash was 20 meters high. That was the height of the Beis Hamikdash. So that's 40 amos high and 20 amos, it was 10 meters wide. So it was relatively a very high building. In fact, the Gemara in Baba Basra discusses a whole discussion on architecture just briefly. It says the Gemara suggests, why was there curtains instead of a wall by the second temple? Since the second temple was a little higher, it was so high relative to the width that the bricks would have fallen. And so they had to use curtains instead. Now there were 13 curtains in the second temple, 7 over the 7 gates, 1 over the opening of the entrance porch, 1 at the entrance to the sanctuary, 2 to serve as the divider between it and the Holy of Holies, and another 2 in the upper story. When it became impure, so if it somehow got in contact with COVID-19, no, not COVID-19, if it got in touch with other spiritual impurity, then it would be dumped in the mikveh, in the temple courtyard, and hung back up. Sometimes it would need to wait overnight if it was a more severe impurity. And if it needed time to dry and it was new and beautiful, they would spread it over the colonnades so that people could see its beauty. All the utensils of the temple had copies and copies of copies. So you had second and third copies. So if something breaks, you have replacements. And finally, the one in charge of the garments, he prepared all the priestly garments. We'll learn more about that, please God, tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining and wishing you a wonderful Shabbat.